Hello everyone. So this is a follow-up to my last video regarding evidence for the existence of the deep state in response to mainstream media, politicians, and their shills claiming that there is no such entity in the government, and that it's not possible for such corruption to exist. Link will be located in the description, because that video will help provide some context for this video, also will help understand the sort of situation we're dealing with here, and just the extent to how much evidence there is for its existence. So, the response that I've gotten to my last video, and anyone who brings up any facts which deviate away from the mainstream narrative on any subject, or even speculate based on a narrative the media and politicians don't like, is that you will be labeled a fringe conspiracy theorist, and that term will be used to dismiss anything you present. So, I believe it goes without saying that this is basically the crowning champion of not-in arguments, because not only is it just a character assassination being used to try and dismiss an argument, but it also has nothing to do with the premise. And even worse, the phrase conspiracy theorist is an actual term which is used to describe, well, exactly what it sounds like. Theorizing that there is collusion by more than one individual or entity conspiring to do something, typically of an unethical or unlawful nature. Theorizing that there is a conspiracy isn't something which is even remotely controversial. If a group of people rob a bank, they're criminal conspirators. Is it really unreasonable to say this simply because there happens to be a conspiracy involved? Imagine if you accused somebody of stealing your car, and then I responded with, "Oh, so what? Do you think lizard people are involved, you carjacker theorist?" You and everyone else would look at me like I'm an anthropomorphic fox wearing a spacesuit. And rightfully so, because that's a remarkably unreasonable thing to do. But that's virtually no different than what the media and politicians do when people point out the simple fact that we have documented proof of unseen politics occurring from within the government away from the public eye. So, it's not even a character assassination because the term itself is neutral. It's a rather mundane position to take, being propagandized into an insult to try and control the narrative and silence dissenters. And indeed, as you may suspect, this is being used as a tool to try and control the narrative. So, what do I mean by this? If you watched the video this was a follow-up to, I mentioned a CIA program known as Operation Mockingbird, which exposes that a decent number of political organizations and press outlets are either directly owned by the CIA or have journalists and figures in their midst who are CIA agents. And this is being done with the express intention of spreading government propaganda and passing it off as journalism or news. Well, document 1035-960 of Operation Mockingbird, which was declassified in 1996, but originally written around the time of the Warren Report, which was effectively internal discussion regarding mass public skepticism of the Commission's findings, was basically a list of tactics that should be used by the media and politicians to silence criticism. And would you like to guess what one of the tactics they came up with was? To quote, employ propaganda assets to negate and refute the attacks of critics, and of course by refute and negate, what they meant was to weaponize the term conspiracy theorist and use it as a beating stick against anyone who questions the government's narrative. So ironically, the weaponization of the term conspiracy theory is a psyop by the CIA to try and silence people exposing shady government activity. Now look, it goes without saying that there are conspiracy theories which are completely batshit, like the Earth being flat, or the world's government secretly being controlled by lizard people, or that the moon doesn't actually exist, which it sounds made up, but I swear to God that's an actual thing that some people believe. But what makes a conspiracy theory bunk is not merely that it's a conspiracy theory. That is declaring a certain kind of claim to be artificially invalid regardless of its explanatory power, which is a fallacious line of reasoning known as special pleading. What makes something bunk is whether or not it carries sufficient explanatory power to justify itself, or whether or not it can be proven to be true. So please, can we stop throwing around the term conspiracy theorist as a dismissal to the idea that what the government and the media might be telling us is bullshit? So I'm sure you remember the YouTuber Paradise, pseudo-intellectual and pretend economist who was the subject of my video, the Alexandria OcasioCortez of YouTube.
More specifically, they promote the Austrian School of Economics, which makes it all the more hilarious they call themselves the Foundation for Economic Education, since Austrian economics is not within the scope of modern mainstream economics. And what I find completely baffling about their supporters is that, in my experience, they are so sure of themselves that they will denounce mainstream economics as fake economics. There are people who will say that somebody like Paul Krugman, who has a PhD in economics, teaches economics, has written economics textbooks, and has won a Nobel Prize in economics, does not understand economics.
Yeah, that guy. So apparently he's been claiming that he's leaving comments under my video which are being removed, but I've honestly had no idea this was even a thing until a few weeks ago when it was brought to my attention that he pinned a comment under the upload of his original video I responded to, claiming I removed a comment of his and then proceeding to paste it. Well, I didn't. His comment was originally under my video and I can't find it under the spam filter, so my presumption is that he deleted his own comment after I left a response to it, then tried to rile his fans up to get them to mob my video with little to no success. So of course when this was brought to my attention, I went to his comment and proceeded to BTFO him again, twice. So far, this weaselly, lying, sniveling little cunt hasn't responded again, so if you want to go see this, you ought to hurry, because I have a hunch he'll probably delete this thread soon. But anyway, where am I going with this, you might be asking? Well, firstly, I just wanted to expose this disgustingly dishonest, cowardly behavior on Paradis's part, but also because throughout his comment responses filled with disingenuous attempts to backtrack on points which he was self-evidently wrong about and contradicted himself on numerous times, and obfuscations, he makes this bizarre non sequitur.
Yes, at least not significantly. Now, K through 12, I'm sure. State governments and school districts absolutely dictate what can and can't be taught. But at the university level, that's pretty much up to the professors. Which is why you can't find a huge diversity of opinions ranging from Austrian to Marxian, girlfriend. So I'll ask you again, do you think climate change is a hoax given how conspiracy-oriented some of your videos are? It wouldn't surprise me.
Which, for the record, the point of mine this is a response to is my argument that academia and the media are run by the state and therefore they're only going to function in the interests of the state. And yes, this is the sort of disingenuous argumentation we're dealing with, that this individual is actually attempting to deny the overwhelmingly Marxist and post-Keynesian slant to social sciences, which basically shows what an ideologically driven charlatan he is. Everyone from the New York Times, to Forbes, to The Spectator, to even the fucking Marxist professors in academia themselves have acknowledged the fact that Marxism overwhelmingly outmatches any other ideology and representation among college professors within social sciences, with 18% of professors self-identifying as Marxists. This means that nearly 1 in 5 of all professors in anthropology, archaeology, economics, geography, history, law, and political science courses are Marxists. Within economics specifically, Marxists and Keynesians make up the overwhelming majority of the field. Only 5% of all economics professors in mainstream academia are monetarists or classical economists. Austrians don't even make up a single percentage point. So to pretend that Austrian economics is equally represented in academia with Marxism or Keynesianism is just a bold-faced denial of reality. I've gone on for a while with this segue, so I digress. But the main reason I felt it was relevant to the subject of today's video is that many people have been asking for a long time and seem to be fallaciously critical about the manner in which I dissect and analyze certain topics. Well, most topics, and I feel it's important to address this one because this all stems from a fundamental difference in understanding regarding current political issues and the interests of the state someone like myself and maybe a casual viewer might have, and I think this video could help explain that a little bit. This, of course, is how supposedly conspiracy-oriented my videos can be, in the words of someone like Paradise. Firstly, let's get over the most obvious issue. The term conspiracy theorist, or describing something as being conspiracy-oriented. Calling someone or something that you don't agree with a conspiracy theory or a conspiracy theorist is not an argument against any points which were made by them, because this does nothing to refute any of the claims they've argued. I mean, at this point, it's quite literally just used by hucksters and pseudo-intellectuals to attack arguments against ideas which they can't refute on a substantive basis. A conspiracy theorist, then, if taken to mean what it does by the definition of a conspiracy, is simply somebody who's theorizing that two or more parties are conspiring to perform a specific action. So, responding to someone proposing an argument which runs contrary to a view you hold by attacking their character with something that isn't even an insult doesn't make you seem rational or skeptical, it just makes you look like a fucking scrub. Even more so given that half the time when someone is called a conspiracy theorist in the media, they aren't even theorizing that something is a conspiracy. I would speculate as to why the mainstream media specifically seems to obsessively use this buzzword to shut down counter-narratives, not crackpot or any other character assassinations, which carry equal explanatory power but actually describe how they use the term conspiracy theorist. But we already know and have solid proof as to how this got started. And to absolutely no one's surprise, it has its origins within the government, specifically under the CIA's Operation Mockingbird program, document 1035-960. In discussing how to counter criticisms of the Warren Report at the time, it's proposed to appeal to incredulity, or perceived incredulity, and refer to all of the critics as conspiracy theorists. And sure enough, you begin to see the term being thrown around at counter-narratives to the state more and more from this point onward. And to be fair to them, it is a relatively effective tactic, at least for mainstream audiences, because it manages to silence criticism, or at the very least fool the uncritical person into not thinking twice about the criticism. And this is unfortunate because even many otherwise insightful and intelligent people have bought into the idea that official narratives cannot be questioned simply because of the optics the mainstream media has attempted to manufacture for people who do. This sort of disingenuous argumentation only benefits groups with significant political power when engaging in immoral actions out of the spotlight, because if anyone tries to expose them, their media can dismiss the criticism without taking into consideration what the critic is presenting, as if their criticism itself is fallacious in nature, regardless of the argument's explanatory power. Now, is this to say that everything which runs contrary to the narratives put forward by politicians or the media is correct, or that politicians and their media can never be correct about something, incidentally or otherwise? No, that would be the genetic fallacy. In other words, attacking the credibility of an argument because of the source who presented it and not the substance of the claim itself. The exact sort of reasoning that the media would use to bolster their constructed paradigm. What I am suggesting is merely that social context and political climate is not relevant to whether or not something is true, and that the only thing which matters in evaluating whether or not a claim has legitimacy is how well it explains things within the realm of logical consistency and observation. The ultimate irony in this, of course, is that the media will often resort to gaslighting and projection to claim that it's the people who are being skeptical of them who attempt to make observation and truth relative to political climates. Even funnier is when they do this while substantiating their own arguments with unfalsifiable, literal conspiracy theories, which are only being propagated for the state's specific agenda at the time, in the case of the whole Russiagate thing. But why I decided to make this video is more because of why this tactic is so effective and the previously noted incentives it serves, touching upon a more fundamental issue in not just political discourse and how people discuss issues, but how people process information and the assumptions they make related to the political system. Now, the key to understanding how the state manipulates people is understanding what incentivizes politicians, because once you understand their incentives, you can understand what causes them to act, and once you understand this, you can understand why the state functions the way it does and what their intentions are. If you're a longtime viewer of my channel, you can remember that I've always been incredibly skeptical of stories presented in the mainstream media and how they were presented, given that these outlets have been blatantly caught lying so many times and have been exposed manipulating data points which seem otherwise credible, to the point where right now you'd have to be a moron to not at least question the sources. But it was around the time that the Internet Bill of Rights scam started being pushed by both larger social media commentators and mainstream media personalities that I began to notice something peculiar, which led me to believe that the fundamental way in which people generally analyze the behavior of politics is fundamentally flawed, and that this false understanding stunts the ability of the general public to have an accurate or meaningful understanding of current issues as long as they're approaching them from this particular method of analysis. Which is that the viewer is told everything is only the fault of some rogue actors, the deep state, or politicians seeking to further their own career, expanding their influence over society. That's just one group or person corrupting an otherwise functional system, and if we had real politicians ruling over us, things wouldn't be this way. The idea is to poison the well using a snuck assumption, which is that everything in politics which goes wrong is the result of individual incompetence or ineptitude, and consequently is just a lone action which has no depth beyond it. Which, in any other situation, would be a valid position to take, but the problem here is that all government employees are, well, employed by the state, and therefore have the state's interests in mind. All mainstream journalism is managed and filtered by the CIA, to which the CIA has admitted on numerous occasions that the goal of the program, Operation Mockingbird, is explicitly to lie to people and make sure that everything they know is false. Their words, not mine. Of course, that means that all politicians are government employees as well, and everything which they do therefore works towards a single homogeneous interest as well. And essentially, the state's interests are fundamentally to obtain funds for itself in order to sustain a monopoly on arbitration, which is then used by the people who declare that they have dominion over the state to maintain dominance over society through coercion. And why it was specifically the Internet Bill of Rights which, for me, began to shed some light onto this was that the state-controlled media was attempting to argue for having the state nationalize social media by having the FCC dictate their terms of service and having the FTC criminalize content posted to social media the state arbitrarily deemed to be unfair, in the words of their own bill. Silicon Valley social media giants are, of course, subsidized by the state and have their terms of service dictated by government regulations from other countries, along with think tanks like the Atlantic Council, and the CEOs of which directly benefit from this as they can never go out of business, which is why they also support those same regulations which the media and politicians are claiming oppose their interests, which would actually cement their place in the market for eternity. I realized that there is a major conflict of interest within the mainstream media, but this one realization brought into question every single narrative in which our political discourse today is shaped around. For example, Donald Trump directs the CIA director as part of his cabinet, and the CIA writes and controls the stories presented in the media. And along with this, there are bills written every single year which have to pass the president in order to be approved, which give hundreds of millions of dollars in tax funding to these major media outlets, which are supposedly unfair to Trump. With this taken into consideration, the media's narratives are literally controlled by the president, and the president is directing some of them to act as controlled opposition, while having some other outlets, also controlled by the state, come along and present themselves as a counter-narrative, which also promote controlled and false ideas, such as that the other outlets aren't acting in the same interests that they are. Essentially, the Democrat-Republican double standards within the media as they're presented among other political divides within the state are just Machiavellian constructions created by the said state in order to essentially manufacture an establishment versus anti-establishment overarching meta-narrative within narratives which are constructed by the state. Because everything the state does is for a singular interest, and because the media is controlled by the state, it's therefore impossible for the notion that these are just individual blunders or corruption on the part of one individual looking out for their own individual interests to be correct or logically consistent, because every single one of them is intricately tied in with more than one organization or action. Because of the incredibly autistic way in which all of these state actors pretend to be opposed to one another, and the CIA's admitted intentions behind controlling the media and consequently constructing these narratives, the most reasonable assumption to make at face value is that the government and the media are lying or are attempting to construct a misleading framework to lead you towards erroneous assumptions. The most accurate way, then, to analyze the state's intentions is through a meta-analysis of how each purported narrative is put forward by the media and works together with other media outlets, or how it works towards the interests of the state. Once you understand that everything any major media network, politician, or otherwise state-controlled actor says is working towards a singular interest, you will necessarily run into issues with most mainstream narratives about politics, since their purported narratives or intentions contradict their actual demonstrable interests. So, in short, the reason I attempt to meta-analyze everything the media or politicians say, and often propose a conspiratorial slant on it, is because it's literally impossible to take anything the media or the state says at face value with any sort of logical consistency, because every issue is presented within a worldview that's contradicted by observable reality, as I've demonstrated throughout this video, which necessarily must mean that the truth and true paradigm lies somewhere other than within the confines of the official narratives. Now, I have a more detailed video up about exactly what incentivizes the state to function the way that it does. A link to that will be located in the description. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Hope this cleared some things up for my more casual viewers, and I will see you all next time.